Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm Sheryl Sandberg. This is Susan Wojcicki.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
So I think we all know, all the Google people watching worldwide and potentially our Google video audience, that Google's a really special place. And we have had for a long time a series called Authors at Google, where we've invited authors to come share their thoughts. In addition, we've had our Tech Talk series, where we've had people from all over the world come to share their ideas with us here, very much in keeping with our mission of bringing the world's information out to the world. Today we are starting off our inaugural Women at Google Talk series. There could be no The idea behind the series is very simple. We want to bring the most fantastic women in the world here to share their ideas with Google and through the Google video product with the world. Eric Schmidt, our CEO, has been dedicated to this, has been the leader of this, and has made this place a fantastic place to work for women, and hopefully now a fantastic place for women to help get their ideas to the world. Eric?
It's wonderful to be here to introduce the new series about women and about the changes that are going on in our lives every day. I can think of no two better people to participate in this conversation than the two people to my left. Neither of whom needs any introduction, but I'll do my best. After 40 movies, there's nothing more to say about Jane Fonda as one of the tremendous talents in the world today. What I like, though, most about her is that she's much more than that. She wrote a book that I have actually read called My Life So Far. And if you have a stereotype about folks in the media and actors and actresses, this book and the things that she talks about completely change that. And I want to read just one or two sentences to give you a sense of it, because I think it's quite relevant to this audience. I feel that the very changing nature of my life helps to make my story relevant to other people and also to this modern era. Everything about our world today speaks to the need for flexibility and improvisation. Yet young people still feel pressure to do life the way their parents did, deciding early on what they want to be when they grow up and committing to it. They feel there must be something wrong with them when it doesn't work out that way. We've brought up waiting for closure, when I graduate, when I get married, when I know what to do and become a grown-up, and we expect contentment to follow. Youthful dreams then gave way to reality, and we succumb to what is rather than striving for what if. Consistency can be a trap, especially if it leads to being consistently wrong rather than stopping, admitting your mistakes, and changing course. She refers in her book to this as the beginning of the third act of a tremendous life. What I think is extraordinary about Jane Fonda is it's such a human story laid out so well here, and we'll hear more about that. When you take a minute, right? I want everybody to look around here in the audience. Look to the left, look to the right, look behind you. Do you see anything odd? Women. There is, I've actually studied business, and in the 40s and 50s, businesses had all the same problems that a company like Google has, and everyone in this audience 50 years ago would have been a man. Mm-hmm. There is a person who's responsible for this wonderful change. It's Gloria Steinem. Now, I like to think, immodestly perhaps, I like to think that if these two were in their 20s today, they would be Googlers. I have actually read Gloria's work recently, and she rebelled against the constraints, and I'll let her use her own words to describe that she felt. And many of you, just looking at your presumptive youth here, do not appreciate the constraints that women of her age and generation faced. And she, unlike many other people, rebelled, and she rebelled in the most clever way. She had a better idea, and she wrote about it, initially as a writer, and then eventually in founding the defining magazine in that time. And for those of us who were alive that day, that period, I remember how powerful this was and what an enormous sea change she brought. She has, and fortunately or unfortunately, she's quite quotable. A liberated woman is one who has sex before marriage and a job after. I didn't. and an even better one. A woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. I can think of no two better people to have on stage with me than these two. Welcome to Google.
Thank you.
What I thought we would do is I have some questions, and I know the audience has lots of questions. I thought maybe we'd start with, you all have actually, and Jane, I'm going to refer to this as a third act conversation. What is the third act like? What does it actually look like? And you've been working on something called the Women's Media Center. And what's interesting about the Women's Media Center, which in the press has discussed, it's really a radio talk show, right? But it's actually much more than that, based on and we Google are perfectly interested in working with you all, and I think a lot of our employees will want to help in some of the initiatives. You want to talk about them? You want to talk about what you're up to?
About 2 years ago, after the election, a group of us, there was a big question looming. What do we do about the media, the mainstream media? One of the core problems is women's voices, faces, interests, concerns were absent, just absent. News is delivered as though it's gender neutral. It's not. All kinds of things, all kinds of issues and war and peace and so forth affect women differently than men. Poverty, environmental degradation, and so forth. And we decided that we needed to do something about it. The great thing about her, she doesn't just complain, she says, how do we fix it? And we began to talk about the fact that, well, I won't even go into that. I was going to talk about the Leadership Institute. I won't go. The other side trains its speakers. There are talking heads all over that represent the opposite of what we believe. In our opinion, the opposite of democracy. And they're trained. They're trained to stay on message. They're trained in a certain ideology. They're recruited very young, and then they're spread out through the mass media. We decided that we wanted to create a women's media center that could do a number of things. First of all, bring women in every way into the world's consciousness through the media, because we're missing both in front of the camera, behind the camera, as professionals, as spokespeople, as stories. We wanted to be, and this is where we kind of dovetail with Google, we wanted to be a place where news that gets missed in the mainstream media, news from every part of this country and every part of the world can get viewed and channeled and written about through a gender lens, through a woman's lens. And why don't you take it from there, because there's other things that we're doing too.
Well, I think as I look out at you that really we are at heart a group of people who are mad, who are gifted, who are imaginative, who are pissed off that 60 to 80% of the people who voted for George Bush thought they were voting for the opposite of what his policies really are. We're bringing together, as you are together on this wonderful campus, smart, gifted women inside the media who are media professionals, who are trying to do their best in their individual jobs and being a support system for them in all kinds of ways. So, we are putting stories out there on our website. You can find our website and see our original material there. We are hot linked to all the progressive women columnists. There's, a lot going on there. We are also trying to unspin the spin by giving accurate language as opposed to what we frequently get. It's not a death tax, thank you very much. It isn't everybody who dies who gets taxed. It's an inheritance tax. and onward from that. And it really is a center of energy to train people as spokespeople, as Jane points out. Now, the very first project that we spun off and we're very proud of is Greenstone Media, which is a radio network, and that's what you were mentioning. It's the first woman-owned national radio network, and in radio talk, network means not a chain of stations, but a center of programming. So we have created the Greenstone Media Group, which is for-profit, unlike the Women's Media Center, which is a 501c3. It has developed over the last year 12 hours of programming, which is now being streamed from its website, greenstonemedia.net, with two 3-hour drive time shows with women stand-up comics who are smart and funny, who give the news and give information and make it interesting and so on. That's one project. Training people is another project. Making accurate spin-free language is another project. And we were fortunate enough to be given right away not something as gorgeous as this, but 6,000 square feet in the Empire State Building. So we have a wonderful office. If you're in New York, you need to have a press conference. You know, we can give you a place to have it. You want to have a training session or show a documentary film, we can do that. There needed to be a physical center in New York as the media capital of the world where people could come. So that's, you know, our overall purpose is to make women visible and powerful in the media, and that means, of course, it affects everything. I mean, it isn't as if there is any such thing as a women's issue. Every issue is a women's issue. So, you know, violence is normalized in the street and in foreign policy because it's experienced in the home. But how often do you hear that? We want to make this kind of linkage so that we, in looking at the world as if everyone mattered, we actually shift and change the view of every issue.
When I went back and read the things in the 70s and 80s that you all worked on, I remembered the feelings and the sense of what was going to happen. And it didn't quite all work out that way. One of the great achievements, as I mentioned, from in particular your leadership, is the integration of women into professional life. Did it turn out the way you expected when you founded the magazine, when you were so much the target of opposition and fighting in the 70s? Is this the outcome you expected? Did you expect something different?
Yes and no. No, it's interesting. I think that if we then had been able to see all of you now, we would have been greatly encouraged in many ways. Looking at this audience, looking at the public opinion polls, understanding there is majority support for all the basic issues of justice and equality we care about. So if we looked laterally, I think we would have felt very successful. If we looked vertically, you know, at what's going on, who's in power, who's making the decisions, and the translation of the majority opinion to the decision-making structure, then I think we would have been surprised and disappointed. And I expect we had too much faith in democracy. I think we thought that if we got the majority, you know, 60, 70% of people to support all the issues of equality, it would be translated into the power structure. So, you know, we were naive, I think, about the degree of democracy we have and the other forces at work, including control of the media, which is, you know, what we're trying to address now.
For Jane, you've been an activist all your professional life, right? You've had 30 years of this. Is this another time for activism as you see it?
What do you mean?
Well, you were very outspoken with respect to Vietnam, very outspoken with what you saw, the inequalities with respect to women and poor people and so forth. Is this a continuation of that? Are we in the same situation we were in the 70s? Is it different?
The conditions in the world. It's the same and it's different. It's, you know, we see ourselves at war again. we see ourselves having been lied to get into the war, and being lied to get in perhaps another war. And, you know, that is a repeat of what happened in Vietnam. And that's discouraging because it means we didn't learn the lessons. And there isn't as much public outcry for many reasons, including there's no draft and also because of the media. Because we're not being told the truth. If you really want to find out what's going on, you can't go in general to the mass media. You have to go to, you know, various blogs, and you have to subscribe to magazines and newspapers from Europe or Asia and so forth. I mean, it's really hard to find out what's really going on. So that's part of it. So that's what's the same. And for me personally, what I've learned in the course of my, which is actually 40 years of activism, how can I say it simply, is that nothing will change until women make it change. And it's not just rhetoric. You know, there was a time in my life where if I had heard someone say that, I would have thought, well, that sounds pretty rhetorical. But women are the agents of change everywhere in the world. And you can't address poverty, you can't address sustainable development without taking women's rights and issues into consideration. And you know, there's a lot of talk about poverty and a lot of really good people in the world trying to address it, Jeffrey Sachs and others. And I know that the Google philanthropy, a lot of that goes to poverty in Africa. There's not often that work is not often viewed through a gender lens. It's not often seeing the extent to which it is mostly women and children who are poor. It is mostly women who are impacted by environmental degradation. For example, it's women basically in the global south who are the farmers. They plant the crops, they harvest the crops, they chop the wood, they fetch the water, they cook the food, they feed the children, and they take care of the health of their families. And so if they have to go 5 miles further to get wood or to bring water back, that is going to have a major impact that's going to start with the woman and then ripple through the whole community. So every single issue that makes life so dangerous and unhealthy in the world emanates from, I mean, it starts from the impact that it has on women. And we want that to be a big part of the work we do at the Women's Media Center, because that's left out of the national dialogue. And our research shows that women want to know that. And so we want to create a global community. And this is why we feel such kinship with Google, because you're about community and about stories, about personal stories. And that's what women do best. We create community, and we tell our stories around campfires historically, now around Google and webs, but we're trying to put the gender back into the campfire.
Do you have a sense of how this change will occur? Where is the outrage? Because I don't hear it. Well, and yet you're so passionate about it. Is it that you're not being heard? Is it that there's somebody fighting against you?
Well, I would say, just as somebody who spends a lot of time going around speaking, I'm on the road maybe a third of the time to campuses and so on. The outrage is there. It's much more difficult to get it reported than it was in the Vietnam era. Having said that, it's remarkable that we have turned in the majority against this war. It took 4 years, at least in the case of Vietnam, for the majority of the country to see the war. Now, that's happened much more quickly, even though there is supposedly not a draft. Now, part of what we want to do with language is to explain that there is a draft. There is a poverty draft. If I say that to you, you know what it is, right? There is a green card draft. Part of the reason that the administration is not quite as draconian about immigration as some of its supporters is because they are getting people into the country and into the military to serve in return for getting a green card. There is an education draft. The tuition, well, you know, kids are graduating now with more debt than the average family in this country because tuition has gone up 30% just during this administration. College loans have gone down because he's given more money to the bankers that you know, service the loans. So, you know, if you say those things, it's my experience on college campuses that, first of all, there is much more outrage and much more activity than is getting reported. Part of the reason that the first spin-off was about radio is because, you know, in the Vietnam era, if Jane and I went around touring, we were interviewed on the radio. Now there's a closet with a spinning disc being programmed 1,000 miles away. There's no more possibility most of the time of being interviewed locally. So I don't think we should get too much into self-blame. Yes, it's our responsibility to keep this country from being the lowest voting turnout in the world, which it currently is. It's our responsibility to act, but we can't take the blame onto ourselves totally. We have a right to be angry at the fact that we are being active and it is not being translated into visible form for the rest of the world to see. I mean, I'm writing a book about being on the road for 35 years just because I'm so frustrated that what I see is not, is not visible. It's such a different country from the country we read about in the media.
Yeah, I completely agree. I did a 1.5-year book tour for my book and traveled all over the country and other parts of the world, but in this country, including, you know, Kansas City and, you know, really into the heartland. And what Gloria said is so true. People are angry, and they just, there isn't quite as much organized movement to harness it, but it's there.
Let's and I'll ask my last question, and then I'd like to get questions from the audience. Both of you have been identified with both activists and, in particular, what was known as women's liberation, the women's lib movement. Where does it go from here? The women that I work with now are faced with many more complicated life choices with family and husbands and work and the pressures, especially if they're single moms or whatever. And it's a challenge, I think perhaps a welcome challenge, but it's nevertheless a very big challenge. And it's a greater challenge, in my view, for women than for men, just because of the way society works. Where does women's liberation, as I know it from my generation, where does it go from here?
Well, I think there's a kind of natural progression. We started out with equal pay. You'll be glad to know there was a moment when people thought that women worked for pin money and shouldn't have equal pay. We got through that. Everybody supports equal pay. It's known as the part I agree with, right? Then there, then there was comparable worth, because we figured out, well, if women are totally nurses, you know, equal to whom? They're all getting poorly paid. So let's compare them to pharmacists, who are guys with the same amount of, that was comparable worth, right? So we've moved forward on those, and we're still trying to get there. And that is revaluing salaried work. What we now need to do is value unsalaried work. You know, a third of the work in this country is done by women mainly, and some men too, and it's not called work at all. It's raising children, it's taking care of invalids and AIDS patients and aging parents, and all the work of caregiving. And human maintenance is a third of the work in the country. We have a piece of legislation that could make that visible by attributing, you know, the economists in the audience understand that an attributed value is not an unusual thing, right? You can attribute value at replacement level to this work, make it tax deductible for those who pay taxes, and for those who are too poor to pay taxes, tax refundable, which would substitute for the disaster of welfare reform. Now that's a piece of policy, you know, that is an example, but it's actually much bigger, because what it is saying is we're redefining work. Work is all productive labor. And in that process, we are also saying, you know, that men can raise babies and little children too, and indeed, it's not a punishment, it's a gift. And it allows children to grow up knowing that men can be as loving and nurturing as women, and women can be as assertive and daring and inventive, you know, in this salaried workplace as men. And until we do that, we will go on reproducing the gender roles, because we do what we see as kids, not what we're told. Right. So we both men and women grow up thinking that only women can be loving and nurturing, which is a libel on every man in this room. You know, we all have all these human qualities. So I don't know how to break this to you, but I think we've just begun.
There's the subject of violence, too. You know, violence against women was outed, you know, starting in the late 60s and 70s because of the women's movement, the epidemic, the pandemic aspect of violence, sexual abuse, incest. I think part of what feminism means is to look at why this violence exists against women. And part of that has to do with the way historically we've defined masculinity. Masculinity is so much about, I'm going to bring home the bacon, I'm going to take care of my family, I'm the manly man. And so when you have an economy where, you know, in more and more families, women are working at lower salaries and without benefits often, and men aren't, their masculinity is threatened. And we need to create a masculinity that isn't as vulnerable to shaming if we're going to reduce violence against women. And that's very much, I think, a feminist issue. And we as women have to think about it, because the problem begins as we raise our little boys and you know, and our for me, my grandchildren. How we allow our young children to internalize this concept of a masculinity that has to be earned, you know, through domination and violence.
Well, indeed, the problem is much worse. It's bad in the U.S. It's much worse outside the United States. Look, in some of these countries and cultures, it's just terrible.
But it's, you know, over 25% of women in this country are abused, raped, incested. It's horrific.
The cult of masculinity really is a prison for men, too. You know, I mean, in some cases, it may be a better prison with wall-to-wall carpeting and people who serve you coffee and so on. It's a prison, because we all have all human qualities. And what we are trying to do, what feminism does, is to link. I mean, you know, the personal is political. Robin Morgan is in the audience here. You know, that's, and now, you know, that has.
We have her book here.
Yes, oh, this is what the founders of our country really said about religion, as opposed to what the ultra-right wing says they said about religion. It will take your breath away. This is the stuff of, you know, what you need to argue with. Fantastic
and all her research
quotes.
Was done on Google.
Yes, right.
She never went to a library.
So let's get, well, thank you, Google, for helping out. Let's get some questions, and and get people up to the mics. We need to get the mics because we have lots of folks watching. And men and women can ask questions. Jane, can you take 1 minute to introduce the other person or animal on this panel? Tulia.
I didn't realize that Google was such a dog-friendly campus.
She just showed up with her dog.
This is Tulia. I got Tulia so I wouldn't miss my grandkids. So I didn't want to end up then missing her too, so I brought her with me.
Okay, first question, go ahead.
Hi there. I think that the reform you're trying to do in the media is really well targeted and really necessary. I wonder, you know, you talked about training more people and getting more voices out there, but I'm wondering if you're putting any focus on, or how important you think it is to address just the consolidation of the media, and how massive it is, and how hard it is to get any kind of news aside from infotainment. You know, I was just reading a story yesterday about how Barbara Boxer had discovered that the FCC just suppressed 2 studies that came out about what failures the 1996 Telecommunications Act was in terms of just the reduction in number of radio stations, and the fact that there's so few, there's no protest songs for the Iraq War because all the radio stations are owned by Clear Channel. So I'm wondering, is there anything that you think you can do about that? Or?
Certainly that, I mean, it's a spectrum. You try to start where you can. So if you look on the Women's Media Center website, you will find that there's a story about the stalking, rape, and murder of a 14-year-old Iraqi girl by U.S. that we inserted into the mainstream media, or the South Dakota abortion battle that we insert. So there are good people in the media as it exists. So we're not going to wait until we change policy up there. But that is certainly part of the goal, to change the government policy of deregulation that allowed this terrible consolidation. Absolutely.
Gosh, so there are so many questions I'd love to ask, but it's hard to concentrate on one.
You could use some answers too, incidentally. You have answers, right? Don't you? Right.
I wish I did. I'm part of the Google News team. I notice a lot of the other members of the news team are here, and one of the this is something we struggle with every day. Is what we'd like is for Google News to present all sides of every story. So one of the tenets of the free press was that if all of the sides of a story are out, you should be able to trust the people to read it and make the right decision. Of course, now we have this problem that people say, well, I get my news from Bill O'Reilly. That's all I need to know. You can lead a horse to water from either side, left or right, but you can't make them drink. Is there something in human nature that prevents us from that? Is the media just reflecting human nature by presenting what people want to hear rather than?
No, I don't think so.
How can we get people to hear the voices that are out there? On Google News, if I scroll down through a cluster of some story, I get Fox News there, I get Al Jazeera there, I get Xinhua. Mm-hmm. Most people are only going to read either Fox or Al Jazeera. They're not going to see the other side. How do we get them to do that?
Do more of what we're doing, what you're doing, what we're beginning to do with the Women's Media Center. I don't think that the media reflects human nature. I think it kind of develops and prepares and shapes human nature, so that we think that there's just two sides, right and wrong, black and white, rather than holding the contradictions that there are many sides. What did you say in Japan?
In Japan, they actually, when discussing a serious issue, generally have 3 people rather than 2. Because the whole idea that there are only 2 sides to every issue is part of the division of human nature into masculine and feminine. And can you say bullshit on this? It's all bullshit.
Apparently. Right.
And they at least have 3 people, and even that is like a drink of water in the desert. Just to have 3 people instead of to have this kind of constant fighting that's all heat and no light.
So you're saying that we need to encourage the media to actually, instead of having crossfire, instead of having 2 sides, make it more of a Rashomon experience.
You find out who's a better debater, but you don't find out information. However, I do think we need to think very carefully about 2 things. Are we using trusted messengers? We all turn to people we trust and know, and except we don't have time, to look at the full array of different sides. And I was very heartened, for instance, in the last election to see that Planned Parenthood, which has 900 affiliates and it's a nationwide, and 1 in 3 or 4 American women has gone to them, many men have gone to. People believe them and trust them. They endorsed a presidential candidate for the very first time, and they are getting much more politically active. We all have. That's a nationally important trusted messenger. We all have trusted messengers in our lives that we are not using. We really must use those. That's one thing. And the other thing is that I wish you could arrange to have a giant fact-checking system in the sky. Because the thing that worries me most about the blogosphere and other parts of our new world is the difficulty of knowing what's accurate and what's not, and the fact that there is even the dimmest amount of fact-checking at the New York Times or at any other, makes them a trusted messenger. We have to figure out how to make the news sources trusted messengers.
Hi, I'm Missy. It's such a pleasure to have both of you here. I want to just say, Jane, I want to thank you. I have, for the last, I think, year and a half, given this as a gift to every female in my life, particularly those under 18.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I highly recommend anybody in this room who hasn't read it to read it. It touched me because as an undergrad, I was a theater major at UCLA and was in the industry. And as a female, I felt objectified over and over and over again when I went on auditions. Left that industry, got a degree in policy, and went to DC and worked in the last 2 years in the Bush administration. And my question to both of you, and what I noticed when I was in DC, is that many of the female politicians, Nancy Pelosi, Barbara Boxer, Hillary Clinton, it's interesting to watch how they have to defeminize or de-womanize themselves to actually play in that kind of arena. And my question specifically is, how do we support our female politicians so they can actually be human, be female, and be emotional, but still be productive in that kind of environment?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a great question. All I can say to you is if you think that they are defeminized, you should have seen the generation before. So there's a trend line. They are getting, I mean, ever since Patricia Schroeder stood up on the floor of Congress as the first pregnant member of Congress ever in the history of the nation, and said, I have a brain and a womb, and I'm going to use both, thank you very much. Things have been getting better. But I think one of the ways that we do it is to always say to ourselves, are we ourselves imposing different standards on females than we are on males? So, I always try to figure that out, and if I'm feeling uneasy when a man comments on me physically, I comment back on him physically in exactly the same way. And usually it has a sort of consciousness-raising impact. And also we not impose the double standard of expecting perfection from our representatives. And we do that, I mean, and it does really cripple them, that they are supposed to be better than anyone else. We have to look at them in the real world and celebrate their full circle of human qualities. I mean, Bella Abzug was one of the greatest dancers ever. Played the ukulele. I mean.
Ann Richards.
Ann Richards is a great symbol of a full circle human being, right? Right. So we have to celebrate that.
And vote. Vote.
Right.
As a follow-up, roughly 80% of the elected officials are male. What would the Congress and the government look like if it were 80% female?
Well, I hope you all understand we're not biological determinists here. We perfectly well understand, that women can be just as evil and difficult, and men can be much more feminist than, we understand that, okay? In the aggregate, however, the mere fact that women don't have our masculinity to prove, is useful. And therefore, if you look at the studies of any decision-making body, whether it's Congress or anything else, if it is all men, it is more likely to reward the most aggressive solution, even if it's wrong. If it's all women, it's most likely to reward the most conciliatory decision, even if it's wrong. But a 50-50 or more or less evenly divided group is much more likely to have the full circle of alternatives in order to find something that's appropriate for the problem at hand. So I do think that a Congress that looked like the country, racially, economically, every way, ethnically, what a relief that would be, and it really would act differently. With all the studies of groups show that it would act differently.
Hi, I'm Jos. I'm from the Netherlands, and I consider myself a pretty liberated guy, being grown up in a pretty liberal society. But I've learned I've still got a long way to go. But one of the things that we experience in Northern Europe, especially, is we have boatloads of immigrants from more traditional, like masculine, feminine countries. And what we see is that even second and third generation immigrants, and especially the girls, like voluntarily go back into that traditional mode, like wearing headscarves and basically not be the liberated women that we all expected them to be, but voluntarily go back to this traditionalist mode of society, of operation. And doesn't that warp us back 40, 50 years ago? And what's your take on that? Is there a problem here? How should we address that particular issue?
You've cited some extreme versions of women voluntarily going back to traditional fundamentalist ways of being. And there are more subtle ways that it can happen. I was 2 years old before I, privileged, successful, financially independent, before I was brave enough to truly stand up and claim my voice, because I was afraid that if I really owned who I was, that my man would leave me, which he did. I'm single. You know, that we're raised to be good girls. And so many of us, you know, forget about coming from a culture where it's mothers that perform female genital mutilation on their daughters and where women, you know, voluntarily go under the burqa. It is terrifying for all people who have been raised in a way that stunts their humanity and to think that that's right, to stand up and seize their humanity. Because you think you're going to be killed psychologically, emotionally, physically, in reality. It's very frightening. And I think, you know, what myself and Gloria and other women that are on the board of the Women's Media Center and other friends that we have, what we do is try to support the leaders in those cultures, the women in those cultures who are trying to change from within. One of the things that excites us a lot about the Women's Media Center is that we see eventually, I mean, we've just started, but that we have the potential for becoming the hub, the site, where women everywhere in the world can come to learn other women's narratives, learn how they can move forward within their own cultures, the things that restrict them. We have half of our board is here, or all of our board is here. Do you all want to say anything? Because these are women who are, have you all read Sisterhood is Powerful? Sisterhood is Global? Well, the editor, the author of that is Robin Morgan, who's here. Or you can, yeah. And while you're coming, Carol Jenkins is our chair of the board. Carol Jenkins.
NBC anchorwoman for a year, a true media professional.
Yeah.
Who knows it from the inside.
Gloria Feld, who was the president of the Planned Parenthood of America.
Right.
Why don't you introduce Helen and Kristen?
Helen Zia. Where's Helen?
Helen is right there.
Helen Zia, who was, I'm proud to say, an editor at Ms. Magazine, but who now has gone on to even bigger and more amazing things as a resident of San Francisco and was head of the Asian American Journalists Association. Well, I could give their whole pedigree, but anyway.
And Christina Azakar.
And Christina, right.
I just want to say a quick word, which is this is so fucking awesome. And I now know how it must feel to as if they, you know, refound. I'm in the Library of Alexandria. That's where I am. We have refound the Library of Alexandria. And it's not just, there were friends who said with this new book, with Fighting Words, my God, with the research, you know, short factoid sound bites of that the founders were really radicals. Not so good on slavery. slaves, not so good on women, but on separation of church and state, the real thing. And they said, I still have some friends of my generation who, run with pterodactyls, and who said, my God, you must have spent weeks and weeks in the library. And I said, what, are you crazy? I never left the house. I mean, I just, So everything that Jane and Gloria and Eric have said so superbly, yes to, and we need you. We need you. You are the future. For women of the global South, about whom everything is building community, and about whom, for women all over the world, about whom everything, we were on personal content before you were. That is what the women's movement's been about. So just keep doing it. Feed us your ideas. Tell us what we should be doing with this magic next step in evolution, which is this new communications revolution, and with Google's place in it. I'm a Googler. I want to.
She's a really hard act to follow, but at least I have gray hair. I have one comment and then a question. My comment is, I'm 61, and and I'm a professor at Stanford. This is the first time I've ever gotten up to a microphone to ask a question.
Oh.
Wow.
And I noticed the reason I got up is because of the first 4 people who got up, 3 were men and 1 was a woman, and I said, I have to get up and say that. Because even in this audience, the men were quicker on the draw and felt more legitimate about jumping up to ask a question. And I think that says something about what is the underlying set of issues. And now my question, which relates to the underlying set of issues, which is that what I'm seeing among the young people who I'm teaching and who I'm seeing through my children is that the young women, many of whom have had feminist mothers, are seeing how difficult it is to, quote, have it all. And that working full-time and having quality time with their children, which is all the stuff that they're hearing, just seems impossible. And I think indeed it is. And what is not happening is the men are not feeling that they dare risk their careers to be at home. And I'm just asking, Betty Friedan had said that that's where the problem is that we have not changed the cultural view of what a family is, of what men should do. You've talked about it, but I ask if you have any ideas about how to really begin to allow men to be at home so that children can really get both parents and women can be able to do what they want to do and not feel forced into part-time.
Yeah, no, you put your finger. I mean, when I was talking about redefining work and trying, that was part of it. But we are at the place you described. We have convinced the majority of everybody that women can do what men can do, which was huge. But we haven't even begun to convince ourselves that men can do what women can do. And so children are growing up with much too little father and too much mother, and men are not developing all the qualities that are wrongly called feminine but are just human, that are developed by both raising children and being raised to raise children, so that you become a whole person. Much of it, I think, is, you don't know where to begin exactly, so I won't say much of it, but part of it is that young women are not yet angry about this. I think that will be the next big stage, because women's pattern of activism is kind of usually not, I'm sure everybody in this room is an exception, but anyway, is the reverse of men's. We're conservative when we're young. We don't make waves when we're young, and we get steadily more radical and troublemaking as we get older, whereas men tend to be rebellious in youth and get more conservative because men gain power with age, women lose power with age, makes sense. Therefore, young women are still assuming they have to do it all. And I must say, the women's movement never said have it all. We all always knew that that was the enemy of the women's movement saying that. If having it all means doing it all, it's not possible. You can't have 2 full-time jobs. So we need to start at the microcosm of ourselves in the household saying no. Then what cooks can also eat. I'm not cooking, you know. A woman in an audience stood up and said that she was worried about this, so she just had a baby and she went away for 3 weeks and left her husband with a new baby because she realized that he would not learn unless he had to, just like she. And the audience went,
Did they survive?
Yeah, no, they survived. I mean, some of it is control in women. It's the get out of my kitchen syndrome. It's my house, I'm going to control. We have to look at the microcosm, and are we really expecting this kind of change? And we have to look at the macrocosm and get work patterns that allow both women and men to be the parents, the nurturing parents of babies and little children, so that you can work a 3-day week or a shorter day, or what every other developed country in the world has more than we do, which are flexible work patterns and childcare. We're the only industrial democracy, or whatever we are. Do we still say industrial? No. Technological, whatever we are. Do we still say democracy in this country? Anyway, that doesn't have a national system of childcare. Kids need to see each other. They get very bored with looking at grown-up knees in the television set. So you can start at the policy, political end, and you can start at the personal end, and we'll meet in the middle in a revolution.
We could take a good look at what the Netherlands does. They're not perfect, but you're way ahead of us in those areas.
We have time for a few more questions, so why don't we have the folks that are lined up ask their questions reasonably quickly. Go ahead, and we'll see you get some quick answers as well.
Well, I wanted to tell you it's a pleasure to have you here, and I thank you so much for what you've done for everybody, especially for me at Berkeley in the 70s. I wouldn't be here at Google, I don't think, if I hadn't been so taken by what you both did then and stood up and gave us a voice and power. So I wanted to thank you. That was my first part. There's a couple more parts. One more part is that if somehow you are partnering with Google, I would be thrilled to help you in some way to make the full circle to come back. I do QA, and I would be glad to do some kind of QA. And then I would be thrilled. And then the third part of it is that I know you touched upon it with your question, is I am just really scared about the rise of fundamentalism. I think it's not just one religion. I mean, we have it here in our country. And as a feminist, I am so worried for the women who are oppressed again. It's like we can have an influence in our country, and hopefully we'll stand up and show the world something about it. But I do worry about that, and I was wondering about your thoughts.
Well, I don't know, Jane, do you want, it's fundamentalism, well, this is the point at which I get in deep trouble, okay, but anyway, okay.
And I'm not
Monotheism was invented to put God into one kind of human being, not into nature, to make it okay to dominate nature, to make it okay to dominate. The rise of fundamentalism is precisely to put down the worldwide rebellion of women, and it also has all kinds of racial aspects, and it is politics in the sky, really. And the first thing I think we have to do is, especially in this country, is to stop being afraid of discussing it. We have allowed religion to be off limits as an area of discussion because, well, but when it is political and oppressive, we have to be able to name it. And that's what's so great about Robin's book, because you see that our founders were saying exactly that. You can't have a democracy with priests. We shouldn't even have chaplains in Congress. Jefferson sat in the White House and edited everything undemocratic out of the Bible. Can you imagine anybody even criticizing the Bible now? Saying, hello, maybe it was the Gnostic Gospels were much more authoritative. Jesus never said he was the Son of God. He never said. I mean, there's a world there that we are afraid to approach and therefore is crushing us because it knows very well what its purpose is, and we're afraid to name its purpose.
Thank you.
Let's go to our next question. Thank you. And I suspect many people will want to help you as well as you.
So my mom was a member of the National Organization of Women in March, in the Mother's Day March in Chicago in 1980, and did sit-ins in college and was very taking action to support women's rights, and think so highly of you both for all of your action and leadership. And I don't see a woman of my age doing that, including myself. And how did you have the strength to take that leadership role and really put yourself out there and really message and communicate to the public and lead people to march and raise awareness of these issues? Because I feel like we need that now from women and men. And I just don't. I see that there's a leadership vacuum, and is it the media? And maybe that, if there was more awareness of what was actually happening, people would find a way to drive that anger and frustration to actually doing something. Because in the last election, I didn't go to Ohio and knock on doors, and it's like I think a lot of people are in this sort of complacency. Can't believe it, but I'm not willing to do something.
A lot of people did though go and knock on doors.
Oh, they did, yeah. And I hope in the next election, I want to connect with some group that is going to go and do that. But I feel like that spirit was so alive in my parents' generation. In a way that I certainly didn't see it on my college campus in Florida. And I don't know, maybe it's, how do we train the leaders, to really take that next, are you training new leaders?
Well, we are. We are training, as the Women's Media Center is, the wonderful woman, age 61, who got up and said this is the first time she's, we're trying to help women find their voices young and get out there in the media and spread it. But I must say that part of the reason you know Jane and me was because there were so few of us. Now it seems to me there's so many of you. We were like 6 crazy people at the time. And there are many, many, many more now, and therefore you don't see this same kind of individuation, but it is present. It is absolutely present. And whether you're getting politics in song lyrics with Ani DeFranco, or whoever, that you're that didn't exist before. It was June Moon, Honeymoon. Now you've got to see our group in your iPod, or whether it's on campus with majority opinion. But it does require us to say, how am I translating this into action? And what you just said was the answer, that you're going to do it this time, right?
That's right. Let's have a couple more quickly, and then we'll be...
Thank you so much for coming. I'm just in awe, and I read every bit of Ms. Magazine, and it really totally changed my life. And just that you came to Google, that we're not selling out and working for ourselves, that working for a corporation, we could also work for a cause. So it means a lot to me. Anyway, my question was, I think when I read feminism, sometimes we have to work with theory because we have to have vision, and it tends to be very white. And I grew up very sort of white. So it speaks to me, but what is your vision of feminism? Diverse yet very unified, because I see it going to environmentalism and all these other things. But what is your vision for now? And I'm fine with changes, and I know visions change, but I would just like to hear that since you're here, and I would like that slice. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I just want to say one thing personally. I go to the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta. It's the largest training center for African American ministers and me. I'm the only white student there. And a couple of the classes that I'm taking is womanist interpretation. And I am in this school surrounded by black, their word is womanist. It comes from Alice Walker's writings, My Mother's Garden. Feminism, womanism, it's there, and it's a women of all color. And I personally have experienced it, and it's proof to me of how far we've come from an all-white middle-class movement to a global, really global, multiracial, multi-ethnicity movement. I mean, it's there. I just came back from Sweden, where there was a feminist candidate running for office, and a bunch of us went just to show that it's a global movement. And
the president of Liberia, who basically won because women in the marketplace could vote in the marketplace, and also because when they couldn't reach an agreement, and it was mainly men reaching an agreement, the preface to the election, the women surrounded the building and wouldn't let them out.
Let's get our next question.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm a big believer in the power of women's institutions. I went to an undergraduate college that was an all-women college, and believe that women's groups have been a big agent for change. But I struggle with the idea that when you label something a women's group or women's media, that it gives more credence to the idea that the mainstream institution is still for men and makes it easier to belittle or sideline. So I'm just wondering how you see the future of these groups and how we can best integrate our ideas into the mainstream.
Well, I sort of envision it like this. You've got a powerful group here, you've got a less powerful group here, whether it's because of for any reason, gender, any ethnicity, whatever it is, If you integrate, at this point, you come into a hierarchy. What you have to do is empower this group to get up here, and then you can come together. So the coming together is the goal, but the path to the goal is to become visible, to move from the margins to the center, to have a voice, to be able to step, So it is labeling things in that way is a step towards not having to label them eventually. And we need to keep saying what the end goal is, I agree, so that we don't think that separation is the goal. It is not.
Thank you. And you will have the honor of the last question.
Right. I don't know whether I'm thrilled or intimidated. But I want to say thank you again for coming. I'm thrilled to be here and hear the two of you. Actually, I want to end this by bringing it closer to what I think are something relevant to the women in this audience, which is there's this brand new report out by the National Academy of Sciences about women leadership in science and engineering, and essentially refuting everything that Larry Summers said, and saying that it's not, differences in ability, it's essentially the death by 1,000 cuts, and the small little things that happen to women over the course of their career that end up holding them back, and the fact that we have so many fewer women leaders in science and technology than the pipeline would suggest. Do you have any, many of the women in this audience are living that pipeline, living the route to potentially being a woman leader in the sciences field. Do you have any thoughts of this, how to overcome, how to stay steadfast through these thousands of small things that aren't even noticed by the participants, neither the men or the women?
She's turning to me, the engineer. That's right. No, well, I think you need each other's support. Women who are going through this struggle, men who understand it and are supportive. We're communal creatures. If we're by ourselves, we come to feel crazy and alone and immobilized. You need people to talk to about what's happening to you once a week, once a month, get together, call it whatever, a CR group, a networking group, a book club, a quilting bee, I don't care what you call it, but someplace, where you can talk about it and get support and pool information. I think that's absolutely crucial, And then also we need to look at the way that the inclusion of other groups transforms the outcome. There's a whole amazing feminist critique of anthropology and a feminist critique of the scientific method that says, wait a minute, your hypothesis dictates the whole thing, and what you get in the laboratory is only replicate, all that argument, which is fascinating. And we need to start our own centers of power, like the Women's Media Center. My college, Smith College, is the only women's college, I think, with an engineering school. Why? Because the young women were going to UMass and we're not getting called on, and we're, whatever. And this went on for years and years and years, and they got pissed, and they started their own engineering school on the premise that not only would engineering change women, to give them knowledge and power and so on, but women would change engineering in all of its different permutations and fields. So again, it's starting with, the environmentalists are right. Think, act locally and think globally. It's starting with the intimate, with ourselves, and keeping our strength up and keeping our vision up, and also going to change the structure and the policy.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come here. In the last hour, we've talked a lot about the sense of activism and the role that everybody has played. But I can think of no better examples of impact on the world than the two of you. I think all of us can only hope to have the level of impact on society as a whole as you have done in the first two of your 3 acts. And since it's going to get more interesting as you get older,
Definitely.
I'm very much looking forward to their 3rd act. Thank you very much.